Alright, before we go into any of the really big releases in October, I figured this would be the best time to do a little of the catch-up thing we usually do. Hopefully this will turn out much better than the Netflix stuff, because obviously with the almost every original Netflix movie being a terrible piece of shit, it tends to go on forever, much longer than I anticipate. But I'm hoping we actually can blow through these, like I'm planning to, in just about a few minutes each, and obviously, given the number you see below, I decided to break this up into two parts, which will just be, the next one will just be tomorrow, and just like a continuation of this, and the one tomorrow is also going to start with Hold the Dark, which was just put up on Netflix today. So yeah, so let's go ahead and try to blow through some of these. Some of them may not be that easy, but let's go ahead and start with Book Club. Something that actually got a major release that I managed to miss, because believe it or not, I wasn't totally and completely rushing out for this. But yeah, it is another one of those that we see at least once or twice a year, where older actors or actresses, or both, get together for what they seem to be hoping to make is the feel-good movie of the year, but it's just the same generic bullshit it always is, as we know. And this one in particular has a setup that does feel a bit... I mean, not only does it just feel like it's really sort of baiting its core audience with not just the actresses involved, but what the subject matter is, but secondly, that subject matter does feel very much like it's kind of already missed the boat. Because we're under the impression that these four older ladies, who are Diane Keaton, Candice Bergen, oh my god, they've already escaped me, Mary Steenburgen, and Jane Fonda. Jane Fonda's the last one I remember, that's bad. They have discovered, they do this book club thing that they've kind of reunited. And of course, the book they decide they're going to do is 50 Shades of Grey, in hopes of not only sort of just, I guess, discovering the subject matter, but sort of spicing up their own lives as well. And it was at about the time one of the characters said, you know, it was this really popular book, and now it's this movie. And it occurred to me, this movie is tackling this subject matter after not only has this book been made into a movie, it's already a damn trilogy at this point. And now they want to tackle this and put it in this movie. So that's basically what our setup is, with the occasional, you know, old people are funny thing, old people, you know, mess up with technology thing, or whatever. All of that is here. But it's also, it does have an appealing cast, though, and not necessarily just the main characters, because while it is, you know, played up as this whole, you know, the whole women can be funny thing, and it's very centered around that particular audience. The male cast is actually really impressive too, even though they're not, like, particularly advertised. We've got Don Johnson, Craig T. Nelson, Ed Begley Jr., Richard Dreyfuss, Wallace Shawn, and somebody I'm sure I'm missing, Andy Garcia. So that's a really good cast list, like, it really is, and that definitely lends itself, especially with all these people playing on each other, and all of them kind of paired up with each other. Even if it seems like it's really, you know, the whole idea just seems really far behind at this point, and it's the same old sort of cliche stuff we've seen from this sort of feel-good comedy genre before. There is room for it to be charming with this cast somewhere. They seem to be having trouble finding that, because not only does it seem like kind of a dated idea to say oh, you'll never believe what's in 50 Shades of Grey kind of thing, but also the fact that that's pretty much the whole setup, but they seem to rarely use it. Like, towards the beginning, they start talking about, like, what happens in the book, and it's like, what happens if we do that? And you kind of think that's what the movie's setup is, but no, it's basically just a jumping-off point to just be any other movie like this. And it's like, even if 50 Shades of Grey is, you know, a dated thing to point out at this rate, it would have changed something up here in regards to this area that we're so familiar with, this kind of movie. But no, they do just kind of abandon that and just use it as their starting point to get to everything we've seen before. And I think, usually I'm not one of those people that says, like, you know, comedies are better if they're R-rated or something like that, or they have to be dirtier or raunchier or whatever. Like, if that's going to just somehow increase the quality. But there are cases like this where that probably is the case. Because it is weird to see 50 Shades of Grey as the sort of foundation for a movie that's PG-13 and supposed to be like this whole feel-good thing for an older audience. And yeah, they do, because every now and then there's a scene like when Andy Garcia takes her out on the plane, and it's kind of like, I think they're referencing the fact that this is what they do in that, but it felt kind of more like Look Who's Talking than 50 Shades of Grey, so, but apart from that, yeah, because they don't really, there's not really much of a raunchiness to it, which you would think it's just completely lending itself to. But on top of that, not only do they abandon that concept, but when they do try jokes, even raunchy ones, like for instance, Mary Steenburgen slipping a Viagra into Craig D. Nelson's beer and he can't get rid of it. It's like sometimes I, you know, get mad at comedies for dragging their jokes on too long. This movie seems to have no faith in its jokes whatsoever, so there's no jokes that even, like, last. They're just, like, these fleeting moments that get, like, you know, some quick, cheap laugh, and then they just move on. There's no, big joke they just really go for in it. And like I said, this setup completely lends itself to that. It's weird how basic and generic this movie is with this setup. And with this cast, too. Like, you look at, like, Diane Keaton and Jane Fonda, you're like, surely they were game for something more, you know, beyond this, but, or at least taking it a little farther. Once again, the movie still probably would have seemed a bit try-hard and a bit too, you know, past its expiration date at that point, but it would have felt like it was trying to do something else, and this movie just seems to have no interest in finding that. It just only has interest in just being yet another one of these where, haha, old people are funny, I guess, especially when they talk about sex or whatever. So that's basically all that's here. And of course, this is eventually leading to, you're not a feel-good movie unless somehow your climax involves a dance contest. Yeah, they even managed to get there. Though, to the movie's credit, in regards to that, I will say, I can probably honestly say Mary Steenburgen tap dancing to a Meatloaf song is not something I ever expected to see while I was still alive. So, so props to them for that. But apart from that, it's about as basic as it looked. So, that's about it. We'll go on now to Show Dogs, another one that went completely wide that I managed to miss once again. Was not exactly in a hurry to see this. So, obviously you hear bad things. It's obviously going to be another talking dog movie. And it's from the director of Beverly Hills Chihuahua, and so it's like, yeah, you kind of imagine what you're getting in for, but people were once again just talking about how it was like, holy shit, have you seen this thing? And it's like, oh, but it's like, yeah, I've seen this thing like 50 other times. They're not going to show me anything I haven't already seen. Well, I kind of underestimated those people because, yeah, this movie's really fucking weird in a lot of ways. Once again, like Book Club, not only does it just feel totally dated, like the jokes are from like the late 90s or the early 2000s. Yeah, somehow in 2018, a dog movie making a reference to Who Let the Dogs Out is apparently still in the joke book somehow, but that's the least of its problems, quite honestly. It's also weird in the fact that it's almost like it's trying to do this sort of... like, it's almost trying to be self-aware while being as shitty as it can possibly be. And one of the things you'll notice immediately is, like, the dreadful CGI. And when I bring these up together because it's like, when you see things like the dreadful CGI and all that, or like, you know, like the first characters we see are like 2 or 3 pigeons that keep popping up throughout the movie, and it's just this clear contrast of animation on top of live action that just looks really weird. But also, and the way like the dogs' mouths just like move really mechanically, and it's really bizarre. Not to mention also, not only is this a bad effect from that standpoint, but also the audio itself. Is like really messed up. Like, there are times when like a human character will be talking and then like the dog's voice or whoever's talking will just like overlap over it. Like the audio started too soon when an animal was supposed to be talking. It looks really cheap and like really like whoever put this together did not care about their job. And honestly, when you look at it, it's weird how believable that is. To just kind of let it go with that. But yeah, they're weirdly enough, it's almost like you're not quite sure if they're doing it on purpose, because there actually is just a tiny smidge of, like, they're trying, it's not like, you know, legit self-awareness, but it feels like they're trying to be a little self-aware. Like, they thought they were trying to do, like, the whole for kids and adults thing. But that's not how it's working. That's not how it's coming off at all. And it's like, because you have moments like, when there was a dog on the red carpet at one point. I don't even remember what the event was. It was that dog show or whatever. But one of them said, like, yeah, I do these shows now because nobody makes talking dog movies anymore. There's weird jokes like that. And the talking dog movie has never died, so depending on just how deep into the depths of straight-to-video you go, the talking dog movie has never died. So only it seems rarely now they actually come back somehow into the mainstream like this movie did. But yeah, I don't know how this happened, but it really just does feel like a movie that's cobbled together by these really, really clueless people. And like I said, the fact that it's from the director of Beverly Hills Chihuahua pretty much takes out any, you know, points it would score from the whole trying self-awareness thing. It's like, this guy knows exactly what he's doing, this guy knows the exact kind of bullshit that he makes, and he just keeps on doing it. And that's not even to go into the whole controversy thing that this movie started. This sort of got it even more into the spotlight, as if it wasn't weird enough as is. And it's like, when the high point of the movie is a French dog that's voiced by Stanley Tucci. Now, mind you, Stanley Tucci has elevated many things, but here it's just like, I don't know. If the French dog is going to be your saving grace, you've still clearly taken all of the wrong turns to get to this point. But then there was the whole controversy thing about how apparently, and I'm not quite sure exactly what went on, because obviously having watched it just recently, I saw the edited version. But apparently when it first came out, there was a scene where they were like, the dogs had to go through an inspection, which is what happens when dogs go to these shows thing. And apparently it was something like, some adults thought that if kids saw this in a movie, it would make them, like, susceptible to molestation or something. The vague outline of this that I know sounds like it was a massive reach. But like I said, I don't know what exactly was going on in this scene, but yeah, just one more thing to add to the weird-ass clusterfuck of this movie. So, yeah, and obviously it doesn't help that I have just never found Will Arnett funny, and that obviously just goes without saying that this is, you know, an issue. Well, no, I guess I can take that back because of the Lego Batman movie, but apart from that, I'm just not a Will Arnett fan. And it's like, it's one thing to have a shitty talking dog movie, but when you have Will Arnett as, like, the face of it, the human face of it, then yeah, everything goes wrong. So that's what that is. Let's go in some totally different directions now that we've got those out of the way. They're going to get much less mainstream and more Sundancey now. We're going to start with I Think We're Alone Now. Something I'd been hearing about at Sundance for a while. It's another end-of-the-world movie with Peter Dinklage as supposedly the last man on Earth. It's another last man on Earth movie, so we've seen stuff like, there was Will Forte's show, on top of, you know, all the ones from, like, the 80s and all that. There was the Vincent Price one from even farther back. There's the Omega Man. And then, like, recent stuff like Z for Zachariah and stuff like that, which is definitely more along the lines of where this movie's head seems to be at. Like, I wouldn't be surprised at all if this and Z for Zachariah were in, like, the same universe, even though that movie is, like, much more atmospheric. But I was excited just from the get-go because Reed Moreno made it, and she is the director of Meadowland, which made my top 10 a few years ago. Just this really small movie that I fell in love with that I'm still have to explain to people what it even is. But just her involvement alone was like, yes, this is her follow-up to Meadowland. I'm in no matter what. And Peter Dinklage is the star of it. Okay. And it does have this interesting start, where we see Dinklage going around, driving around in his truck, and basically just cleaning up the mess. Like, he goes into the houses, he cleans the houses, he wraps up the bodies, he takes them out, and he buries them, as if this is just what he does now. And we get the vibe throughout the movie through context clues and sometimes more blatant exposition that he was kind of this weird, even when the world was normal, when the world had people in it. And he's just basically continuing on that. It's sort of like a reminder of Burgess Meredith in the episode of The Twilight Zone, the Time Enough at Last episode, where it was like, this is what this guy, like, wanted. Like, this is basically, like, his dream scenario, where he's, like, the only person on Earth, and he lives in total and complete seclusion and gets to do whatever he wants to do without ridicule or people calling him weird or whatever. And that's until he runs into Elle Fanning, and then she is the complete opposite. She's this huge extrovert, she's very loud, she listens to music loudly and, like, headbangs while he's just trying to be his straight-faced Peter Dinklage self. And then they basically have to try to live through this despite being complete opposites. The direction you expect a movie like this to go. And I don't know if it's just, like, there's really not much appeal at all to the Elle Fanning character. There's nothing particularly interesting about her. Elle Fanning herself is, I mean, she's a decent actress, but I don't know about you guys, but I'm kind of sick of seeing her at this point. She's in, like, every damn thing now. It's like she's always the go-to choice. Like, it's so boring to see her in movies now, because it just seems like everybody's just kind of picking her for a part, even if it's not necessarily suited for her, and she's just everywhere. So I think that kind of took away from it also. But yeah, I mean, they try to bring it to life a little bit in an interesting way by doing the whole natural light approach, where everything just has that sort of real look to it, where nothing is, like, artificially lit and all that, and it just really kind of sets the tone for the world. It makes it look kind of bleaker and darker, but even so, that only really goes so far for a movie that just doesn't have... It does have directions it wants to go, but it doesn't really maintain interest until you get there, and then once you get there, it's still pretty underwhelming. Like, it does get to... Like, they do sort of go into a different direction, but it's where maybe it's not just the two of them either. But then once it gets into that, it basically turns into the whole... It turns into a he has to decide whether or not he's gonna, like, risk everything to save her sort of thing. And he has to save her from some distress situation or whatever. And it just starts to really kind of fall... It was already, like, just barely hanging on, and then it actually reaches a point where it starts to fall apart a little bit. And it's like, regardless of the fantastic actors you bring into this, it's still not quite doing enough for the story alone, even if you do see some faces where it's like, oh, they're in this, that's awesome, but it doesn't really amount to anything in the long run, and just sort of, like I said, sort of hits the brakes, and it does get, it can get a bit on the nose quite a few times. There's one particular shot where it's like a shot of a map, and there's just like one lone ant walking across it, and it's like, yeah, we get it. We're very small, so that's really all it amounts to. So yeah, really disappointing, but I do definitely see where this could have gone. I don't think... I'm still probably going to be excited for whatever Moreno does next, but as far as, like, you know, the writing standpoint, most of all, like, it's not so much of an execution here. It's the story itself that really is... Yeah, and I know there's only so much you can do with this setup, but so many movies have done so many more interesting things than this had in mind, so it does just feel more like... If you want to say in, like, the past few years, you can watch Z for Zachariah instead and be much more into it, so yes. The next one is going to be The Death of Stalin, something I'm way behind on, because we thought this was going to come out last year, and then technically it did, but it didn't get a US release till, like, this past March. So I'm counting it for this year. But this is another movie from Armando Iannucci, who did... obviously, they're still doing Veep, and then he did In the Loop, and both of which I'm a fan of. I only saw, like, 1 or 2 seasons of Veep, but I did like what I saw. and I do like In the Loop quite a bit. I still haven't watched The Thick of It, which I hear so many amazing things about. But even just based on those two things, this is a guy that has a very clear, very recognizable style that you could recognize from a mile away, and that is very much present here. And of those very few things I do know him from, I think this is my favorite thing I've seen from him so far. Because not only do we have like this incredible cast, where we have, like, sort of like In the Loop, we did have recognizable faces like Peter Capaldi and stuff like that. People you'd expect to see in that type of movie, but then you just had these random, like, American faces like James Gandolfini show up. I almost just called him Tony Soprano. But this movie is, like, filled with faces like everybody will recognize, from Steve Buscemi to Michael Palin to Jason Isaacs. It just feels endless. Olga Kurylenko, Patty Considine, just everybody. And it's this, one of my probably my absolute favorite genre, dark comedy. And this very much takes that approach, with obviously the title being the setup for what is all about to take place, and how his regime basically tried to come together to sort this out, and there was, like, scheming for power and all this stuff, and there's gonna be a lot of really dark shit amongst the, just signature dialogue. So, but the thing about that also is, as far as his dialogue goes, I think the first name you probably want to jump to compare is probably Sorkin, but when I make that comparison, it's not so much that I think their styles are similar. Obviously, they're, both very fast, and it feels like people have to be constantly moving as they say this dialogue, and it can be very... I do think, his dialogue is a bit more, like, harsh and biting, believe it or not, but the way I really find to compare the two is the fact that when I talk about this list of actors that's here, it's when you're approaching this kind of dialogue, it's like it relies just as much on the... Like, obviously it's perfect on paper, but it's just as important to get an actor that can say it just the right way and timed it just the right way. And all these people are able to pull it off in this really big way. And it's like, it even gets to a point where, like, it matters where, like, you can be saying one line, and then there can be an entire change of tone, like, in voice, in between the beginning of the sentence and the end of the sentence. And it completely makes or breaks the scene. And none of the scenes break in this, and none of the actors. I think the actor that's been getting the most attention out of this is Simon Russell Beale, who's basically at the center of this, and is sort of like the mastermind for where all of this is going to go in this really big, sort of scary, controlling way. And this dude is like... There's just such, like, an insanity behind his eyes as this comes together, where he's easily, like, he's got the biggest part here right in the middle. He's just really this, ruthless conductor of all this that's going on, and is definitely sort of the center of the movie. But that's not to take away from anything the rest of this cast is doing. Jeffrey Tambor is a major player I forgot to mention. And everybody also, like, it feels like characters at the beginning just keep coming in and coming in and coming in. And there could be, like, another movie where it feels like you can't keep track of the characters, and it kind of makes you lose just the kind of movie in general while trying to keep up with everybody. But all these different characters are not only played so perfectly, but also distinct enough to where as the movie goes on, it's very... Because there's so many characters, it's very important to be able to distinguish them. Another actor I usually don't care that much for that actually has a really good part here and is really good is Rupert Friend. As this sort of constantly angered son, I think he is. And it's just weird how all these... Like, some of these actors that I may not care for, like Rupert Friend, for instance, and how all these people can just come together. Like, some of them from more of the British side of things, and then people from more American productions, all of them can just come together and make, like, this perfect puzzle. Just being an individual piece of it, and it just all really works. And like I said, taking the dark comedy approach, I mean, this gets, like, so incredibly dark, and it's to my understanding that, like, obviously, with a narrative movie, it's not going to be a documentary, but there's, like, just enough truth in it that it's just disturbing as it is funny, and maybe even more disturbing when it's being funny. I know some people I talked to who saw it a while back said that they kind of they almost struggled to see it as a comedy entirely because of how dark it goes. But I think it's hilarious throughout, and not only is it hilarious, but it's so darkly funny, like, the whole time, given just what the whole foundation of this thing is. It's like, when it does get, like, really extreme and, like, really goes for it, I felt like the comedy was always kind of guiding us there anyway. And it didn't really feel like a break in tone when it would get, really go for it. So I think that's kind of where a lot of the genius of the movie is the fact that it really sort of juggles those tones, but is able to be constantly hilarious in one way or another. And that's the thing, too, about what I love about his dialogue, is that when pretty much everybody in all of his projects is basically just screaming obscenities at each other. And that's on the surface, that's basically all it looks like. It's just people insulting each other and yelling at each other and all that. But there's somehow, amidst all this yelling and profanity, all the funny bits in the dialogue come from the subtlety of how they're thrown in to what these are said. Sometimes it could just be somebody, like a Peter Capaldi, for instance, not in this, but in any other project, just screaming something and it works. Just screaming a profanity and that's all it needs to be. But, like I said, just like if there's like a slight inflection in the voice or something, it just all is just sort of... It's just this really nicely, meticulously made orchestra of words, and just one word thrown into a seemingly regular sentence can be hilarious depending on how it's delivered and what the context is. And so yeah, I did really, really like this a lot. So probably more than I actually thought I would. So that was a really nice surprise. So yeah, and then even on top of that, being so dialogue driven, they do have these moments where, like, the physical comedy can be just as good. Where, like, there's a point in time where Rupert Friend is, like, wrestling a dude over a gun, and, like, the whole scene just stops to watch this in silence. And it's just really plays off the contrast of the sort of constant dialogue really well also. So, yeah, I really like this and all the hilarious darkness that comes with it. So... And amazing performances, like, all across from a huge cast, so there's, like, not one weak link, so that's really great. So, let's move on to Disobedience. I think this is the first English-language movie from the director of A Fantastic Woman, that just won the Foreign Oscar this past year. Where, obviously, it's going to get a lot of attention, sort of in the way Black Swan did, where Black Swan, like, the advertisements came out and people were like, oh, did you see Natalie Portman and Mila Kunis and Megan out and all that? Pretty much the same thing with Rachel Weisz and Rachel McAdams, where, like, this is basically what this movie was known for until it came out, at least. I know that's probably me hanging out in the very wrong circles, but that's basically what was bringing it about, but, you could tell, obviously, there was going to be something... They were going to try something a bit artful in this regard, but I will say right away... I don't know how bad this sounds, but when it first starts, it is like... There are a couple of things going in this movie that kind of had it... I was already kind of against it in a couple of ways. Starting with the subject matter itself, I just think is something that doesn't really interest me. The whole... like Hasidic community thing, where it's like I was having flashbacks of who was it, Renee Zellweger, that was in that movie A Price Above Rubies, and it's like that movie, like I saw that movie years ago, and I still sometimes feel physical pain when I think about the boredom that movie caused me, and I was having flashbacks of that when we got into this. But also on top of the fact that I've said many times before that I do not find Rachel Weisz to be an interesting actress in the slightest. I think she's easily one of the most boring actresses working now. I know that's not a popular opinion, but it's how I've always felt. So just right away, I just go into this thinking, this just isn't for me. Like, I'm just not going to be into this at all. I do like the presence of Rachel McAdams, who I do think is a talented actress, especially when we got to see her really go for it in Spotlight, as far as drama goes. Yeah, so that was kind of a rocky start, but I did sort of like how we were building up to the things that happen in this movie, because there's a lot that needs to be told about these characters that is eventually told to us, but the movie doesn't have, like, a lot of exposition. Like, it's one of those movies where if you want to know something about these people, you just kind of have to watch them, and you'll be able to slowly figure it out, which is very nice. When movies just really seem to... We're really kind of in a time now where movies really sort of fall victim to exposition. especially the really, really clunky kind. And it's where they just want to get all their points out there real quick so that they can move on and just tell the story it is. It's kind of nice that, like, a large portion of this story is figuring out where they come from and why they act towards whoever the way they do, certain people and all that, certain characters. With the main story being that Rachel Weisz's father has just died in the middle of his whole sort of congregation thing, and when she comes back, she's basically been shunned for clearly what the movie's about. And she comes to find that her old romantic partner, Rachel McAdams, is now married to their mutual friend, Alessandro Nivola. And the natural problems will arise. And another thing that they do right here is that when you hear this story, it would have been, like, really, really easy to make the Alessandro Nivola character, like, antagonistic, like, sort of this thing that was blocking their romance or whatever. But I do like the sort of humane way that they treat him throughout it without resorting to making his character that. And he does have, like, one of the bigger conflicts in the movie where it's like he's got to take over, like, that congregation now, and he's got to basically prove that he has, like, total control, just at a time when his life is completely losing control. So I do like that they sort of added that interesting conflict to this character, when, like I said, it could have very easily just sort of thrown him away and made him a very easy character to hate. But there is a lot of stuff that this movie is missing. Like, there is, and I do get the idea behind it in regards to there is a bit of a bleakness to it in regards to how they're being, held apart and what all comes with that and all that, and, like, the family shunning and all that, the public shame and all that. But at the same time, you would think this movie would have a bit more romanticism than it does. It's like, even in the times where they're together, it just seems like there's something missing. I don't know if I don't think it's necessarily like a lack of chemistry between Weisz and McAdams, but there is something here to where it does feel like there's not enough there when they are on screen that just really makes you want that for them, to where it's almost like the movie itself is kind of surrendering to, like, the rules that they're breaking. And it doesn't feel like it's just really going for that and really making it something that we really want to see happen. And yet, like I said, it just really kind of gives the movie this sort of bleak overtone already. Not to mention the whole movie just kind of has this. There's nothing particularly stand out about the way the movie looks either. So it does all just come off very. Like I said, there are definitely some things that, story-wise, like the way they tell it, that give the movie a lot of promise, especially for a movie that I wasn't giving the benefit of the doubt going in. But it still finds a way to be surprisingly kind of stale, despite all this. And like I said, it probably actually could have also been a bit more suspenseful. I think this kind of lends itself to that a little bit for scenes like that, but it just doesn't. It just hardly goes for it in any way, really. And it's, like I said, even though we do get that sort of characterization, it does still feel like there's just, like, a coldness and a distance, not just between the characters, but between, like, us as an audience to them also, and just the movie in general. And there's just something that should be more passionate here that's just really absent. But once again, maybe that's just, I could probably imagine somebody finding that in this, but I didn't. But as I said, unfortunately, that doesn't really surprise me all that much. But still, there is some decent stuff in there, but overall, it's just felt very flat overall, so yeah. Let's go on to Hearts Beat Loud with, this is another indie movie, I think, out of Sundance. Another musically themed one, which it does seem like there's quite a bit of lately, like in that Once vein. I was getting a lot of Begin Again vibes just from the poster itself. I was really hoping that wasn't the case, but no. So it didn't occur to me just now it's the same dude, Once and Begin Again, but those were the two movies I was thinking of. But yeah, it does find like a middle ground between those two, and actually manages to be a sort of father-daughter thing. There was like, I think it was a father-daughter thing. It wasn't Ruffalo and Haley Steinfeld and Begin Again. There is something like that here, but it comes through in a much better way, being Nick Offerman and Kiersey Clemons. And once again, Nick Offerman, beloved actor that I'm actually not that crazy about. I do think his shtick is a bit tired at this point. But I very much warmed up to his character really quickly, surprisingly. Where he's basically the single dad that runs the record store that might be going out of business, and Kiersey Clemons is the daughter who's potentially about to go off to college, but then he discovers that they both work together so well musically that they could start their own band, just the two of them. And then they get like coffee shop famous, and then it goes from there. And like it does seem very like basic as far as the story goes, like with this type of movie, with the whole sort of indie music themed movie. It's the kind of plot you would expect. It kind of reaches the same developments you pretty much expect. But there's just still something so like warm and natural about the movie that it just wins you over really quickly anyway. I think the natural performances help a lot. Like there's other characters that come in and they each have like both of them have their individual relationships. He has one that's sort of blossoming with Toni Collette. Weirdly enough, is not in it very much, but she still is Toni Collette, so she's going to make even a little bit of screen time work. And Kiersey Clemons has a love story with Sasha Lane, the girl from American Honey. And we do kind of go in these opposite directions, sort of showing them in their own individual relationships, but it doesn't work near as well as the scenes where it's just the two of them together, and it's this father-daughter relationship we're focused on. But that is most of the movie. Like, the relationship subplots are very, not like a huge portion of the movie, so it really does tend to stay focused. Like, that does seem every now and then, like, there's one particular, segment when, everybody's gonna sulk and kind of go their separate ways, and Offerman might get maybe drunk and a little bit hostile a little bit, and sort of, once we've reached our conflict has kind of reached a peak just before we're gonna go into the final moments, but where it does feel like that sort of dragged it out a little bit, and the scenes kind of felt like a little too long, but overall it does manage to come back from those in a lot, because this is one of those cases where, given the story and the direction it seems like it's going, this movie probably could have been like bigger, like in scale a little bit, like in story, like depending on the direction that it went. Where it's like you could have easily added another 45 minutes to this movie and made it a significantly worse movie. But the fact that it stays small and keeps its conflict right here and the events of it, like just right in this little area, that it doesn't feel a need to go beyond is what makes it work so well and what makes it feel so kind of, I say confined in a good way. I'm trying to think of what the word is for that, but yeah, and it does flow nicely. Like I said, with these natural performances, really bringing these characters to life in a nice way. I think the scene that really won me over with Offerman's character is when he first hears their song in the coffee shop towards the beginning, or the beginning of the middle, or whatever. And there's just something so sort of heartwarming about that scene and his reaction. That's basically how you feel about the whole movie watching it. Even when it reaches those conflicted moments, they don't really last long enough for you to sort of be dragged through the muck enough to where it's like, oh, this sort of, the good vibes this movie was giving off eventually wore off, because that's what a lot of movies tend to do in their conflicts. They go for the conflict a little too much, and it just completely breaks the vibe. But this movie pretty much keeps that consistent vibe throughout, which is really nice. And on top of supporting characters, we've got a bartender played by Ted Danson that's a really nice addition here, that sort of just comes in and, adds commentary occasionally, which is always welcome from Ted Danson, so that's great. So, yeah, so that's pretty much all I have to say about this. I do think it's, like, if you liked Begin Again, I think this is a lot better than that, but obviously it's not going to reach Once levels or anything, but yeah, those are the two movies I've just decided to compare it to, I guess, but they're definitely the closest, so, so yeah, if that's the line you go down, then this is exactly probably what you want it to be, so. Okay, we can go on to The Yellow Birds. This one kind of caught me off guard, because it's something that I hadn't really heard of. Apparently it came out on DVD last month, and until then, until it was just hanging out at the library, I had never heard of it. And the cast list on this thing is the story, along with the cast list to speed things up, is we have two soldiers in the Iraq War, I want to say, and it's Alden Ehrenreich and Ty Sheridan, and they are run by their sergeant, who is Jack Houston, and we kind of get a back and forth in regards to the home life afterwards and what happened on the battlefield, and we see the home life mostly through the eyes of their mothers. Alden Ehrenreich's mother is Toni Collette, and Ty Sheridan's mother is Jennifer Aniston. It's like, how does a movie with this cast list go under the radar to where it just came out for a little bit and then disappeared and then just popped up on DVD over a month ago, and I have just now heard of it somehow. But that's what that is. And they do sort of, like, it's a promising start, especially with this whole, they really, really put it on Ehrenreich's shoulders by having Aniston's character say, because there's a scene earlier where Ty Sheridan basically tries to bond with him and say, hey, I heard you're from Virginia, I'm from Virginia too, we can bond and shit. And then once Aniston knows of their friendship, she goes to Ehrenreich and says, could you be sure, make sure nothing happens to him over there? And now this is like a big old promise on the shoulders of his character. And then they set that up, and then we see them out there and all that. But then the movie does something that kind of completely throws it out of whack, and it kind of never really recovers from this. And that is, and this is early, this is like half an hour in. It's only an hour and a half, but even so, half an hour is pretty early to make a decision that completely throws the movie out of whack. And that is the timeline is really off. It's doing the nonlinear thing, but the thing about that, though, is that the idea is that Ty Sheridan's character goes missing, and nobody knows where he is, and then when they go home, Aniston has to deal with this, and he has to deal with the fact that whatever happened is something he let happen because he made that promise to Aniston. It's his responsibility, whatever happens to Ty Sheridan. But the thing is the way they set this up is that the movie just goes normally for the first half hour, and then it's a scene between him and Sheridan just talking on the battlefield. And they throw in the whole sort of, guilty angle, like somebody gets shot and dies, and then Ty Sheridan says, like, man, I feel guilty because a part of me was, like, glad that it wasn't me. It's like, it's this stuff that we've seen before, in all these movies. Like, there's a bit of American Sniper in this, there's a bit of Billy Lynn in this, pretty much any of those is in here, The Hurt Locker, whatever. But the thing is that once that happens, when Ty Sheridan sees somebody die and say, whoa, I feel guilty, I'm glad that wasn't me, and then they just walk off together, we just cut to Ehrenreich coming home and Aniston getting the letter saying he's missing. And then we go on this, and then suddenly it's a mystery what happened to him, and we keep cutting back and forth between current home life and back on the battlefield, with none of these things really answering any questions. Thank You for Your Service is a movie that feels like it's in this a lot as well, that we just had. So that just really, as you can probably guess, just throws it off entirely to like suddenly say, hey, the timeline's fucked up now. We're going to make this a mystery now or something. And you got Jack Houston kind of coming in and out. His character, like, he's good here, and he really could have used a lot more screen time. It was actually really disappointing that he's, like, barely here, because he was, like, probably the most intriguing character. And then you've got this dude this huge superior that keeps popping up, played by Jason Patric. And it's, like, the way he just kind of pops in, it's like, you can't tell if he's sinister or not, or if he, like, knows something that nobody else does. But he only pops up, like, 2 or 3 times, and it's, like, by the time we do figure out, like, what that character's leaning towards, it's kind of like, there's not really, like, it never really felt like much of, like, a mystery, even though that's how they were playing it up. Like, the whole, like, you were never quite wondering, like, oh, what, happened to him. Like, you just kind of immediately, well, the thing they also do is, between Aniston getting the letter and, like, collapsing in her front yard, and the time that we find out he's just missing and hasn't actually been killed, there's enough time to where you just assume he's been killed. And then when it turns out he's missing, it's just like, oh, well. And then, the stakes are gone. And it's like, no matter what the turnout is now, it's like, it feels like we've already faced the worst possibility, so if that should happen, how much impact is it even going to really have? And then basically in between these scenes, it's just the same old domestic thing. The guy comes back from war, and he's all fucked up. He's suicidal. He screams at his mom. He sleeps all day. That's basically all it is. It really has nothing new to add to this at all. So there's a lot of promise in this. David Lowery actually, apparently he was going to direct it. And you would think, oh, the old man and the gun must have gotten in the way, but apparently this has been in production for so long, it was actually Pete's Dragon that held him up. Pete's Dragon from 2 years ago that kept him from directing this movie. But he's still, like, the top credited writer on it. So it was actually going to be something that he brought out, and I would be interested to see it under his direction, because he does have a very distinctive style and a very sort of artful style, even when he was doing Pete's Dragon. But as is, it just feels very sort of like, you know, by the book, this kind of story, and there's nothing, like I said, the whole timeline angle and the building a mystery angle just really kind of messes it up. And even when they try to make it like this big emotional point, like it ends on a very interesting, like the last scene of the movie is a very interesting scene to end on, given where we're coming from, to where it really sets up that it's coming from an interesting emotional point in regards to what it wants to drive home, but in all, it just does not come together. Like, the parts are here, the cast is certainly here. Like, I would definitely watch this whole cast in another movie, for sure. But, yeah, it just kind of doesn't come together. But there's pieces in there that there's a movie in here that you want to see, it's just not going to be the one you get. So they made it about halfway. So that's what that is. Moving on to Rosy. After I saw Rosy, I even looked it up. This movie is apparently so off the radar, it has no reviews on Rotten Tomatoes. Not like a 0 or anything, just apparently no critics have seen this movie still. So that's a bit alarming, especially when you realize this movie stars Nat Wolff. Yeah, that's strike fucking one right there. But it does have a familiar setup, depending on what movies you've seen, because the two I'm thinking of are kind of go back a bit. The whole idea is that we have Stacey Martin from Nymphomaniac as this girl that's dating Johnny Knoxville, and basically has this... She's basically like a model, but she wants to be an actress. And Knoxville's like this really sleazy dude that seems to just be taking her into this like seedy underworld of whatever the hell this is. And it's just kind of going nowhere for her. And apparently she's been being watched by Nat Wolff, who eventually kidnaps her and then brings her to his place and basically holds her hostage and is going to keep her here until she falls in love with him. So it's like, we saw this in Almodovar's Tommy Up, Tommy Down, and the movie from, I think, 1965, The Collector, with Terrence Stamp. The Collector is an amazing movie. Just make sure you don't confuse it with the Saw ripoff from, like, 2012 or whatever, or 2009. No, The Collector from, like, 1965, the William Wyler movie, is great, and really creepy, and really effective, and this is what this movie is basically trying to do, is what that movie did. And Tommy Up, Tommy Down had a bit of like a dark comedy vibe to it, which you would expect from Almodovar doing a story like this. Now, this movie does not really... Because the thing about The Collector is that it was like a thriller, almost horror movie. And like Tommy Up, Tommy Down was like this really bizarre, like dark comedy. This is just like a regular, like, thriller approach. But it's like, this movie is so, like, off. It's like, you're not even sure if it's trying to be a romance movie by the end of it. This movie, like, tonally has no idea what the fuck it's doing. And that's not helped by the score. Like, the score is just this really sort of odd thing that kind of gives it this sort of offbeat vibe. Like, offbeat, creepy vibe. But that's like I said, that's just the beginning of its troubles, because we do have, it's one of those cases where it's poorly put together. It's like, the editing feels incomplete. Like, it's also trying to do the non-linear thing, but it's like when they cut from like one thing to the other, it feels like there is no complete thought. Even by the end, it feels like the ending is missing, kind of, and that's obviously off-putting. But the thing that really stands out the most about what makes this movie so awful is not necessarily just the Nat Wolff character, but every character, even the Stacey Martin character, just feels like nobody seems to have a particular objective here except the blatant psychopath. And it's like, and you think, oh, well, Stacey Martin obviously has a goal. She obviously needs to get out of his clutches. Sometimes. Other times, I'm not really sure. And maybe this might sound interesting to you if you haven't seen it. Because you're probably thinking, oh, they kind of made the character ambiguous. Like, maybe she's so fucked up. Maybe she kind of wants this or whatever. But no, it's like 1 minute, honest to God, 1 minute, she has sex with him willingly. And then in the next scene, she tries to take his fucking head off with a shovel and escape. And then when he gets her back, she's saying, I'm sorry, I did that. But the thing is, you might think, is she saying, I'm sorry, because she doesn't want to get killed? I don't, at this point in the movie, it felt like she was genuinely sorry. She tried to take his fucking head off and escape. Just, I don't, and the whole movie is like this. And yeah, ambiguity, this wishes this was ambiguity. This is just somebody that doesn't know what the fuck they're doing, doesn't know what the fuck the word tone even means. They may not have even heard the word tone. And it just is this really unpleasant, fucked up in not the good way sort of thing. And I think this also isn't helped at all by the performances are just kind of terrible too. Like, obviously, we expect terrible performances from Nat Wolff. They're like in his genes. They're like inherent to him. Alex got lucky when he made Hereditary. I don't know where the hell that came from, but clearly Nat Wolff does not have an acting bone in his body. And even Stacey Martin, though, I think that's kind of like, I'm not putting enough blame on her when I say I'm not sure where this character's coming from. I think it's just a whole... I think the bad performances and the bad writing are all kind of working together here to just make this, what the fuck is even going on anymore? And, like, what is this... Like, what is the point of this? Is it trying to say something? I don't think... I read somewhere something like... The whole, you know, like a battle of the sexes thing is like, you know, power and dominance, like, which is which thing. I don't know. If this... nothing comes through. Nothing comes through from this movie at all in regards to if it's trying to say anything whatsoever. And I can't even begin to, like, try to figure out where the person that created this could be coming from in making it. I do not know what this movie can accomplish at all. And it's confusing in all the wrong ways. Like, it's confusing, but I don't think that's intentional. Like, I really don't think so. So it's, especially the way it bounces around in time, it just doesn't, just the whole thing doesn't make any fucking sense. And it definitely doesn't give you any reason, after a while, to even try further to figure it out. After a while, you just say, I don't fucking care anymore, just stop. Just end. And then when it does end, it ends so fucking abruptly, you're just kind of like, you could have at least ended it, for fuck's sake. But, yeah, so that's... Yeah, its main focus is just to say, hey, look how crazy this dude is. And, oh, is she crazy too? It doesn't fucking matter, and nobody cares, so fuck off. Let's go on, after something like that, to Mary Magdalene now. This movie is by, if the sort of look of it looks familiar, it's by Garth Davis, who did Lion. And interestingly enough, that only occurred to me about halfway through, and it's like, you can actually kind of tell, despite the very different settings these two movies have. But obviously stars Rooney Mara as the title character of Mary Magdalene. But the thing here is that, once again, I go in this not being Rooney Mara's biggest fan. She has certainly won me over at least a few times. And I was feeling good about that because one of the movies she won me over in was Lion. So it's like her and Garth Davis together work. And then her and Joaquin Phoenix, obviously the real couple, but also her limited screen time in her, I thought worked really well. And then this whole thing, the biblical movies, I don't know. They're not something that I've ever. I can't really think of a biblical themed movie that I've been like totally crazy about. Even like The Last Temptation of Christ. It was just like I saw it once and it's not really been something I've been in a hurry to return to. And then there's like the Gospel according to St. Matthew. There's obviously Passion of the Christ. And then obviously all the fucking cheap ass Pureflix movies or whatever, or like Son of God, whatever that was. It's just not really. Yeah, maybe I've just seen a few too many of these knockoffs. Like, what was that one with Joseph Fiennes, like Risen or something? Or it's like even they do kind of have like from a production standpoint. You can admire these things. Like, oh no, I guess there is. I guess you say Jesus Christ Superstar is probably a movie I'm crazy about. And that's the thing is when you're watching the events happen in Mary Magdalene, it's just like as each event happens, I'm remembering like the song that's associated with this portion of it when it's Jesus Christ Superstar. But the thing is that there's not too much of a cast. There's the two of them obviously, and then we have Chiwetel Ejiofor and Tara Rahim from A Prophet, I believe. So as Judas, which is interesting casting, but also feels like a part of me saying it's interesting casting, another part of me feels like he's a bit miscast, but because he just kind of, I think that also just has to do with the characters in this movie just pretty much being so blank. Like everyone from Mary Magdalene to Judas, everybody just the only real kind of standout obviously would be Joaquin Phoenix's portrayal of Jesus, where he does get like a few standout scenes, but overall the characters just feel sort of very blank, almost like it sort of depends on us to just, because we know the story so well already, it's like, oh, well, no need to make these characters all that interesting. So there is that. There's definitely sort of like a mutedness to this whole thing, and it is one of those things where after a while you just kind of wonder where the passion came from to make it at all. Because you don't really get that vibe that somebody was like super, super into making this. Or it's like maybe they were at one point, and there is definitely an interesting factor when you look at like the casting of Joaquin Phoenix, because you look at his filmography and all the choices he's making lately, and all the weird, interesting projects he's taking on, and it's like this seemed like so random. And then like the release was just so brief, and like nobody even really talked it up. I think the critics like bashed it more or less. And so it's just sort of a weird thing to exist. From a director that had such a triumphant movie before this in Lion that worked so well. And so, yeah, and like cinematography-wise, like I said, from a production standpoint it works well, but it does feel like, maybe it's a sort of a cynical part in you or something, but when you look at some of these shots, and even if they're like really well done shots, all I could really think was they just sort of looked like trailer shots. Like I could very easily see the scenes in this movie just edited into like a 2-minute trailer. And that's really all it was giving me. There was like no real like emotion or anything behind it. It just felt like this very sort of vacant movie that just sort of exists. And it's, yeah, very much sort of fits the criteria of a movie that kind of has a big production, but all in all just sort of is released quietly to no fanfare whatsoever, because there's just really nothing to really talk about with it. It's like, yeah, they told the story, they used interesting actors to tell the story, and even then, it's like Chiwetel Ejiofor, for instance, just feels so incredibly wasted. Like, he's there, he speaks sometimes, but there's nothing really, truly dramatic here, which is a weird thing to say about a movie with the crucifixion in it. So, I don't know, but, I guess there is, one talking point would probably be, I do think, obviously there was Mandy, but I think this is like officially the last score by Johan Johansson before his death. And the score is interesting, and more so in the fact that it sort of feels a bit unconventional, like in this movie. Like that's easily the standout of the movie, is the score feels like something we don't typically hear in a movie like this, and it sort of it's like that's the closest thing this movie has to a personality, is that score. So if that's something you're looking for, that's probably like the main interest you'll have. So yeah, but overall, like I said, it feels like it should be so interesting from the cast to the people behind it and all that. But it's really just this, just as bland as any of like the ones they throw out, like Risen or Son of God or any of those like that. It just feels like, even like the same, it's like, we say the production feels vast, but it's like they could have just walked onto those sets for all we know. And it's like they just film it in a desert and put up a couple of boulders and there you go. That's kind of a, I would say, a letdown, but I kind of had a feeling, like I said, just me towards biblical movies in general, I'm just really, they just don't really hook me that much. But so yeah, there's just really kind of nothing here for something that looks so damn interesting on paper. It's a tragedy. So we're gonna end this part on a kid like Jake. Um, I wasn't really sure what this was when I went, and I actually kind of thought it was gonna be like an autism thing. But no, Jake is a kid that likes to dress up in girls' clothes. It's that what was that movie? The Dress Code, or Bruno, whatever you want to call it, with Alex D. Lenz and Shirley MacLaine. It's basically that, only trying to be a bit more dramatic about it. And it's the married couple is Jim Parsons and Claire Danes. Yeah, that's as random as it sounds. That's basically what it is. They've got, like, there's an overbearing grandma played by Ann Dowd. And basically all these different characters sort of come into this, but the core of the story is the fact that their son Jake likes to dress up in girls' clothes and how they're going to handle that, like when he goes out into the real world, like when he gets bullied, or how are they going to talk to him about it. But the thing this movie does the most off-putting thing about this movie is the fact that Jake himself is like barely in this movie. And it's like Jake is like the talking point throughout the whole movie. But we get like glimpses of him. It's sort of kind of like watching Carnage a little bit, where we got like one glimpse of the kids at like the very beginning and then the very end, but we know nothing about them personally, only how the parents see them. And it's like, but the thing is that's Carnage's whole point. Okay, I think this like really wants to be a study about not just this kid, but how he affects everything around him also, but still have him in there. But no, he's there, and we see what he does. We see him in school occasionally. We see him dressing up occasionally. Occasionally he'll scream that he hates Claire Danes, and that's about all we actually see of him. Everything else we just have to base on the parents' perspectives, and it does not work in the same way that something like Carnage would, where you talk about it without actually showing it. So, and it's obviously, you know, the reason I stopped watching Homeland, one of the reasons was because I was tired of watching Claire Danes cry with her crazy eyes, but we get a lot of that still. It's like her one trick, really. But and yeah, and there are certain interesting places the movie wants to go, and it scratches those surfaces. But overall, it does feel like it doesn't really want to go too far. Like, it's almost like it's afraid of being offensive or something, which is weird because the movie's rated R, but the only reason it's rated R is because they say fuck like 5 or 6 times. And yeah, so you think like it's gonna like go somewhere. We kind of come full circle back to book club, where it's kind of like you think they're gonna go farther. That sort of seems like the whole point. Only a kid like Jake actually has the R rating to go on. To where we can, like, really... I mean, not that you need, like, an R rating to delve into why a child would wear girls' clothes, but still, it seems like, in regards to the parents' lives and how they exactly go into this and where they're coming from, because I initially thought, as I was watching it, like, Jim Parsons felt a bit oddly cast, and it's like, he's actually he's a good actor. But in, like, a role like this, sometimes it can be hard if you're, like, very aware of the fact that, like, Jim Parsons is gay in real life. It can be a bit odd seeing him play straight. Like some gay actors can, like, really pull that off, like Luke Evans or Neil Patrick Harris. But Jim Parsons, it wasn't easy to buy, but I was able to kind of realize that they were actually kind of using that, because it actually does come in to play later that Jim Parsons, while playing straight, is still playing a character that's like... The fact that he's not particularly masculine is actually like a talking point in regards to where Jake could be coming from with what's going on with him. And like I said, they kind of set up these talking points, and they do play them up in these, like the fight scenes between, like domestic fight scenes, verbal fights, obviously, feel like realistic enough, like they're grounded in some sort of reality, and I think that's sort of the main selling point, the thing that you can take the most away from this in regards to its execution. But it still just does not feel like we're really going anywhere with it. Or really, really, like, you know, investigating the material. It's just kind of like laying it out, saying, hey, you know, this stuff happens, and then that's all they want to say. They don't really have much to add. And then they occasionally throw in these other characters, like Parsons' character is like a psychiatrist, but he's got a patient that's like sort of, you know, it kind of walks all over him a little bit, but this doesn't really, it seems like it kind of has a point, and we kind of get what that point is, but it feels like they don't really pay it off in any way whatsoever, given how many scenes are devoted to it, like leading up. Like it's leading up to something, but that just doesn't happen. And then like the woman that works next to him, like they're going in a whole direction there, and then they just abandon it. So it's like they have all these directions that they kind of want to go, and they want to set up, but like I said, then they just want to stop there. The movie is like an hour 25 or something. So it's obviously in a hurry to get somewhere and to say something, but it's not interested in saying more than, you know, hey, this exists. So that's, yeah. And then, like I said, even, like, when they're basically playing the blame game, like, where this could come from, when, like, he watches The Little Mermaid, and he dresses up as The Little Mermaid, and then Claire Danes goes and puts the DVD away, and she kind of stops and she looks and she sees that all of Jake's DVDs are, like, Disney princess movies. Which is, you know, could be one thing or the other. I mean, you'll find the Disney princess movies somewhere in here. But still, the movie is trying to say something. But like I said, you're not going to get any farther than surface level stuff. So that's, like, good on it for trying, but was it really? Was it really trying? I don't know. So, yeah, so that's what we have here. And that's all I had to say about these, because this is just going to continue tomorrow. Like I said, we're going to start with Hold the Dark and go through 10 more. So we'll see what happens with those. So until then,